There's a concept on the right called the Omnicause, and the idea is that the left, through either intersectionality or the melding of political issues through algorithms, sees every cause as related. Climate change, Palestine, queer liberation, anti-colonialism, it's all one struggle. And I would like to coin the opposite, if it hasn't already, the Omnicrisis. And that is, the right sees the problems of our age as all intertwined, as one great burden our civilization bears. Sub-replacement birth rates, the demographic substitution of native, white, European, or heritage settler populations of Anglosphere countries with migrants from the Middle East and Africa, economic ruin, particularly through the bloated welfare state that redistributes resources from natives to newcomers, dislocation, a feeling of dispossession of one's own country, isolation from one's own community, the ideological perversion of young people and their literal perversion through both sex education in schools and pornography, and an increasing retreat into a digital universe of bread and circuses through phones, increasingly wokeified, propagandized entertainment, and television. And these are all issues identified by writers like David Goodhart, Christopher Lasch, Neil Postman, but those are non-fiction books. Until now, there hasn't been a work of fiction that's blended this omnicrisis together to present a picture of a deracinated, deindustrialized, weary Britain that's ultimately ashamed of itself, whose population walk along patchwork pavements of tarmac, concrete, and slabs interrupted by litter and weeds, staring down at their shoes or their smartphones, ashamed of what their nation has permitted, what has been inflicted upon them by their state, and feeling so powerless to resist it. And that novel is Bothelford's Gone, by Edward McLaren. I've met Ed, gave me a copy of his book, he's a gentleman, and I believe a sequel will be forthcoming. And it was published earlier last year, around the same time that former Chancellor and Home Secretary Sajid Javid published his memoirs. And Sajid is a Pakistani man born in Rochdale. And the memoir is mainly about how Pakistanis faced racial prejudice when he was growing up. But Bothelford's Gone is about the grooming gangs, and not just the activities of the gangs themselves, but how every state apparatus, the culture, psychologists, schools, politicians create a set of incentives that don't just enable the gangs, that don't just cover them up, but discourage the beleaguered British population from doing anything about it. And Ed does a very good job here, because if it were any other setting, the misfortunes that befall the main characters, Jack and Agatha, in this book, would seem outlandish, or perhaps a step too far. And at times, I have to admit, I did have to take a break from reading, set it down. I said to Ed, it feels like he's playing with demons with the contents of this book. But unfortunately, this kind of stuff not just could happen, but does happen. It is happening now. And this book is set in the present. It's not a book about the grooming gangs that happened between the 70s and the early 2010s, when the scandal first flared up. It's saying that this is a picture of modern Britain, ravaged by fake refugees like Basil, who lie about their age to enter a secondary school to prey on the women therein. Demographic churn. The crimes committed by men protected by the celebrants of diversity, equity, and inclusion that infest every institution. The desecration of our war memorials, our monuments, the closure of our churches before they're converted gleefully into mosques by the new inhabitants. Bothelford's Gone is a picture of any town in Britain that is rapidly succumbing to a set of social, economic, and demographic conditions that are intolerable for the native population, but that seem inescapable. Now, they might conjure a latent Anglo spirit from the depths of our breasts, the kind that built this great country and created a world-spanning empire that brought civilization to the darkest corners of Africa and the Indian subcontinent, and is now being punished for doing so by the vengeful members of its former colonies. But it seems, from the headlines and the events of the book, that the British state is determined to perpetuate the abuses suffered by the main characters, and then constrain the consciences of anyone who still possesses enough awareness to be perturbed about them. The protagonist, Jack Grundon, is born in 2007 in Bothelford. Bothelford is a fictional settlement that is actually named in the Doomsday Book in the aftermath of the Norman Conquest. Seems like the theme of invasion is hanging heavily over this novel, and particularly the occupation of our state by a hostile foreign force, foreign to our interests, if not ethnically, but nevertheless, Bothelford no longer exists. And gone, in the title and towards the end of the book, refers to the language that we lack to describe what is happening to our towns and cities. The places that we were born into, grew up in, and feel nostalgia for, and that are slipping away. A bit like how Hemingway once described bankruptcy, slowly then all at once. But we can't describe exactly how, or those of us with a lack of self-regard, like me, saying my opinions on the internet can, but many people can't describe exactly how because it's been programmed out of them and they've been taught to self-censor, largely by newspapers and the television, as is pointed out in the novel, and so they just say, oh, this is gone, often followed by to the dogs, as in it's been ruined. You could substitute the word gone in the title out for ruin. This could be Bothelford's ruin. And you could substitute Bothelford out for many places. Slough, Rochdale, Rotherham, Reading, and increasingly even the quietest of areas that we thought the diversity wouldn't touch. Bournemouth Beach, or even areas of Bexley Borough, near me. Nowhere's safe from becoming Bothelford. The woman on the front cover is a fictional character called Marine Emory, and she is this sort of a pagan Anglo-Saxon folklore character, a spirit that acts as a watchful guardian over the town, and over time she becomes incorporated into the Christian community that exists in the town, and apparitions of her are sort of sighted around the church. And McLaren puts in there that when a group of Pakistani migrants from Kashmir commits the first assault of a young girl in Bothelford, residents report an apparition of Emory encircled by a halo of blood, and it's meant to be very prophetic. And Ed explains in an interview, it's as if she's an immanent racial consciousness that has been sleeping for ages, almost beneath the security of transcendent morality projected by the church. And as the power of the church wanes, as our default assumptions about our high-trust society are obliterated by not just the new arrivals, but the ideological state that brings them here and imposes them upon our communities, upon towns like Bothelford. As the churches empty out, then that default assumption of safety and security and of salvation withers away, and something more ominous and mournful, but then perhaps vengeful, might take its place. And this is the thing that the symbolism in Ed's novel foreshadows. He says these genius loci, these location-bound spirits, are coming back. There's something ancient, pagan, awakening in the rage of some English people at what is being done to their country, while unfortunately many of their countrymen, like Jack's parents in the novel, his separated parents, his father's quite a well-to-do intellectual type, you can imagine him basically like cycling around the roads where the rape gang in the novel have their dens, listening to the rest of his politics in his lycra shorts, and his mother, who is a menopausal, sort of middle-class, almost Tory voting woman who self-censors when she notices the drunk Arab leering at her sitting on the war memorial, a bit like, I think it was in Belgium, the African migrant cooking his breakfast on the flame at the tomb of the unknown soldier. But she says internally, well, I can't notice because I don't want to be like Enoch Powell. I don't want to be called a racist. These are the people who represent the British lions that have had their fangs pulled out by the desolation of economic opportunity, but also the introduction of a propaganda vehicle into their own living rooms, and that the television interacts with the older generations in this novel completely differently to how the smartphone actually interacts with the younger people in the novel. The smartphone is like its own little portal to hell in Jack's childhood. He's raised idly using an iPad, something that we see a lot of children doing now. Walk into any restaurant and you'll see a kid in a high chair swiping with Miss Rachel or Peppa Pig or whatever other algorithmic slop is being fed to them rather than the nourishing conversation, care and attention of their parents. And then Jack admits that he sees violence, beheading videos, the deaths of people in natural disasters, and and infrastructure accidents, and also pornography from a very early age. It's shared by his classmates. Their childhood is turned into something sordid, their innocence is destroyed, and so then that sets them up to be desensitized to the very real predation they face by imported predators who lurk around Bothelford looking to exploit young women and girls. But Jack also recognizes that it is the autodidactic properties of social media and smartphones that has built up his immune system to state propaganda and the complacency of his parents despite the atrocities being visited on Bothelford. He does his own research into the grooming gangs, into demographic change. He confronts his father at one point after he gets out of the hospital. I'll keep spoilers to a minimum, after he sustains a pretty serious injury. And his father still denies, despite the horrors going on in the town and to his own son, he still denies that demographic change and crimes committed by men that never needed to be here in the country in the first place are going on because the Financial Times hasn't reported on it. The Economist isn't writing about it. The BBC hasn't presented it to him in a digestible 30-second news item at the 10 o'clock news. So smartphones, social media, the internet is presented as both a blessing and a curse. It's both a tool and a device, something which displaces authentic human activity, and a kind of sword that you might pull out of the stone to vanquish the dragons that, in many cases, it summons. And that theme of a kind of polluted, perverted hero's journey is intentional, or at least it was in Ed's consciousness, kind of inhabiting it as a geist, and came through in the novel. Because as Ed explained in his interview with Jay, which is linked down in the description, his editor saw the contours of a hero's journey in Jack and Agatha's friendship, relationship, and Jack has a kind of chivalric calling to rescue the damsel from the dragons that are preying upon her. He enters the dragon's lair and tries to retrieve her. But such chivalric efforts are impossible in a nation, a culture, which has been discouraged from feats of heroism, which has been told it cannot have a positive story to tell about itself, which raises young men in a curriculum full of poetry like Colonization in Reverse, or novels about apartheid South Africa, where a young white woman accepts being gang raped by black South Africans as a form of just punishment, and commits herself to raising a mixed-race child because she hopes that this will have power in a post-racial, post-grievance South Africa. She sort of martyrs herself to the anti-racist cause, which is something, quite harrowingly, that Agatha refuses to do when she visits an abortion clinic. Another of the state apparatuses which keeps the abuse quiet and facilitates it, because of course the horrible outcomes of child abuse, including in the real life grooming gangs, are forced impregnation and children born of rape. But there are multiple examples in the various reports, the Rupert Lowe's inquiry and in the J and Casey report, where girls are handed off to the NHS by their abusers or by the social services that were meant to take care of them but were often facilitating the abuse, allowing them to be picked up from care homes, and given abortions or abortifacient pills or birth control, and none of the nurses or healthcare staff ask any questions. Why are these 13-year-old girls bleeding, impregnated, accompanied by older men of a different ethnicity that aren't related to them? Why they're at this clinic in the first place? No questions are asked, because of course that would be racist. It is almost impossible to be a heroic knight in these circumstances, even though Jack's spirit calls forth to him to change the world he is living in, to vanquish these injustices. It's why he feels impotent and confused when Agatha originally confides in him that she is being abused, and asks, are you going to help me, or are you going to do the same as Frederick, or Fauna, as Jack's trans-identifying classmate goes by? Are you going to fail to help me just as he failed to help, because he lives entirely in his own head? He lives in the realm of philosophy. He has retreated to augmenting his own identity to make sense of the fact that as a white man, his efforts aren't wanted. Whereas the television is depicted as the head of the Chimaera, this egregore, this composite entity that haunts Jack's dreams. It has the body of the drunken Arab occupying the war memorial, which is obviously very symbolic because it is the post-war anti-racist consensus, the pledge of an open society where the bonds of nuclear families, patriarchal authority that's absent in both the households of Jack and Agatha, of national identity, of Christianity, all of those are pried apart. And new elements, foreign elements, are introduced. And their closed cultures, their enclaves, are indulged so that society can tell itself it is being open, even when it is doing it great harm. Those were the promises of the post-war consensus, of Theodor Adorno, who said there can be no poetry after Auschwitz. The idea that all fiction is possessed by a hauntology of that event, and it is necessarily focused on the crimes of the Second World War to ensure that never again is a promise that is fulfilled. And never again is not that people shouldn't be subjected to genocidal erasure, because, I mean, the kinds of torture that you read inflicted upon young girls by the grooming gangs is comparable to the war crimes committed in the Second World War. No. The promise of never again is never again can white populations be allowed to have the kind of national consciousness that is blamed for the Nazi atrocities. Never again is not a promise not to repeat the atrocities, but it's a promise to eradicate the conditions that they saw as leading up to the atrocities, even though those causes, I think, are misdiagnosed. And that Chimaera sits atop that war memorial with the head of the television. And it's because Jack has not just been raised by screens, but it's because the passivity of the inhabitants of Bothelford and of his own parents to the horrors being inflicted upon their own children is induced by the television that tells them everything's okay or don't look back in anger. It's very telling that Ed decided to have an Oasis poster in Agatha's room when Jack eventually goes and visits her home, which is being used as a den of iniquity and prostitution by the gang that is targeting her and her mother. The Chimaera is described as, seated at the top of the war memorial was a monster with a television for a head and dripping red mouth of teeth. In the dream, Jack tried to remember which video games he had played the night before to inspire these images, but nothing exactly fitted. He was somehow aware he was in a dream, and yet couldn't influence its contents whatsoever. The Chimaera with the flashing rectangular face and the red jaws spoke to him some distorted lines his mother had read him from the poet Percy by Shelley. It declared itself to be Bothelford's king of kings, Ozymandias, sovereign over this zone for its amusement. It is the idea that there is a great beast that presides over all the goings-on in Bothelford, and that those that see the atrocities being committed in the town are pacified, petrified, even like statues, who Jack sees as his aunts and uncles, meaning that they are adults that are meant to have a duty of care and consideration over the children, but do nothing instead, because they're paralyzed by the TV screen that sits on the head of this great demon. And the Chimaera in the book represents the maddening quality of this abuse going on in plain sight with cameras around. But everyone is glued to their TV screen and the hyper-reality it projects into their living rooms where nothing bad is happening. He couldn't take it. He took his Ciprolex. He couldn't take it. He wanted to start punching holes in the walls. He imagined Agatha as a happy mother with a little girl who looked just like her, and he started sobbing. He was not meant to live in this world, right here, right now. But that one, the one where that was possible. And this was even truer of Agatha. She was meant to live there, not here. What had she done to deserve this? All of this. This wasn't the moral universe. Jack had long known that. How could it be this evil? He glanced at the smiling African face on the outreach poster, the diversity outreach poster, and it seemed to laugh at him with the voice of the Chimaera. They were the same after all. The Chimaera, as it had told him in a dream many years before, was Bothelford's king of kings. It was everywhere, it ruled, it normalised things. What had happened to Agatha was now just the kind of thing that happened in the United Kingdom. The curtains of the operating theatre closed. The things that happen in the halls of our institutions are kept away from the TV screen. So people are complacent and cowardly and not stirred to action. And they are instructed to deny it, even when confronted by the evidence of these atrocities by their own children who are at the coalface of suffering. Instead, Jack's mother decides to comply with the intervention by his teachers, by government anti-extremism program Prevent, and subjects him to anti-racist therapy by a black woman who barely works her shifts and is obsessed with bell hooks, and gives him ADHD medication which saps him of his imagination, his inspiration, sedates him, and makes him perform very well in a compliant education system, but suppresses his spirit. Just like all of the pensioners and middle-aged men who drink solemnly in emptying pubs in the middle of the day, who lament what has happened to their town in their lifetime, but who don't fight back. And if that's my one criticism of the novel, it's that it doesn't actually feature stories of anyone having fought back, because we do know, in reality, there were men that tried to rescue their daughters from the kebab shops and dungeons that the rape gangs held them in. I mean, Marlon West, working for Restore Britain, he was arrested by the police for trying to spare his own daughter from that fate when she was taken into a care and then prostituted out to Muslim abusers. We know that there were brave Englishmen, there still are, that are trying to stop this and have resorted to vigilantism to try and save their own children. And the state holds their hands behind their back. They demonize them in public, and all of their spokespeople and political parties, while knowing that the abuse is going on, and allowing the abusers themselves, as is the case of one of the police officers in the novel, to occupy positions of power and privilege in the state. They take the side of the abusers and continue to provide customers for the gangs via its immigration policy, while telling the native population that they can't do anything about it, it isn't even going on, and then slapping the fathers with criminal charges when they try to stop their own daughters becoming casualties of the diversity agenda. The Britain depicted in Bothelford's Gone, and which is one that increasingly people feel they live in, is a panopticon, but maddeningly one which doesn't provide any prospect of punishment for the actual criminals, and instead just locks you in a cell so you can watch the atrocities going on in the courtyard at all times. And being brought up in that culture, being made an unwilling participant in the incentive structures, such as the exposure of young men to pornography, the porn trade of which the rape gang in Bothelford controls, makes you feel sordid and in some way complicit, even if you want to stop it. This passage of Jack agonizing over what he can do to save Agatha from this fate, given he sees Agatha's mother on a porn website, he says, "It's so evil. What am I supposed to call it? Evil. It is evil." What he didn't say out loud, but felt shiver through his head against his own will, was the new fact that he's just realised, that he too was evil. He was evil, and had been made to participate in evil in order to prevent him from fighting it. Jack didn't feel this to be an exaggeration, and he just knew on some level that this was a tactic of the Chimaera. For in another age, he could have banded together with friends and reported Basil and Hussein and even Fahir, and the whole village would have joined him in combat, supplied him with arms, even as they took him lovingly into their own. Even in the 1970s, in a mass society where populations of millions could be spread and shifted at the will of insane governments across the West, he could have resisted, or attempted to resist the gangs. What they did, what they had already done. But today, he, as a citizen of the United Kingdom's flourishing multicultural democracy, had a device in his pocket that his own parents had bought him when he was 14 that enabled him to watch one of the victims being humiliated and tortured wherever it pleased him. If he were interested in the fate of a particular girl, Jack knew he could look her up and have his tastes cultivated to be more like the predators he had told himself he wanted to bring to justice. It was evil, and he was part of the evil. In order to destroy it, he would have to destroy part of himself, or simply himself. He couldn't think about Agatha. As Jack looked over the hot phone screen and shut the power off, and he saw his own darting, predatory eyes reflected in the black glass, he began to understand the meaning of the phone and what it really was. He went to the bathroom and poured himself a water. He drank and sat. His pulse was irritated and irregular, but his mind was lucid. Sane, on the verge of being sober again, he realised an aspect of life in which he had been insane for almost all of it. What did his phone do? The phone enabled him to watch 30 seconds of Alice Darga, and that option, that humiliation, would now always be available for him to enjoy no matter the circumstances. This possibility had always existed since he had been given the phone, and so did watching pornography in general, which was more unreal, strange, and terrifying than anything his entire ancestral line had ever been exposed to in their youth. Therefore, Jack concluded, the phone was a porn device with additional features, decorating and disguising this central fact. And so, Jack worked out, the truth was that Jamal's parents had gotten Jamal a porn device, and so had Muhammad Akbar's, and Agatha had a porn device also, and so did many of the children Jack knew as a boy in his online classes during the pandemic, that the effect on their entire generation were too great to be encompassed by anyone analysis. Certainly, yes, for some, childhood would have been nothing less than violent pornography interspersed with execution videos and little else but that. Jack's upbringing has conscripted him into a culture that normalizes this kind of abuse, that desensitizes people to it, and given all consumers of pornography cannot actually verify whether or not the participants themselves have consented, it means that you in some way have to compromise your own morality and be willing to compartmentalize, ignore, excuse the abuse of some for your own gratification. And that means that you participate in the cycle of abuse and violence that is destroying your society. Because, as Ed writes, Jack didn't want to know the disproportionate majority of porn actresses were white, and yet, of course, he did by now. And elsewhere in the novel, it is raised that the Muslim men have been watching pornography of white women, have been stewing on their seething ethnic resentments of our society's relative success to theirs, blaming us for the squalid conditions their ancestors lived in, the civil wars that ravaged places like Syria and Libya. And they think that sexual conquest, the mistreatment of white women, is just recompense for how our ancestors treated theirs. Feeding these industries, which prey on young boys just as the foreign predators prey on the young girls of Bothelford, is perpetuating a cycle of decline that is destroying our countries, that is sapping us of our vitality and our abilities to reclaim and restore them. And even if you have the best of intentions, even if you are a sensitive young man reading literature like Bothelford's Gone, even if you appreciate nature and architecture and the remaining vanishing vestiges of beauty like old churches that are boarded up and smothered in diversity memorials, the incongruous street art that insists we are one great big national family, despite all the murders and rapes committed by them against us. If you have that conscientiousness in your heart and mind, that will be discouraged by the natural entropy of how the people brought into your country treat it. Their careless indifference to the state of things, your sensitivities, your sensibilities, your aesthetic preferences. And this is summed up when, earlier in the novel, Agatha asks Jack, what does he want to be? And he says something akin to a vigilante and a bin man. By day, I want to clean up rubbish, and by night, I want to walk around with a baton and vanquish evildoers. And he starts doing one of the two, the one socially permitted thing that he can do, which is go around and clean up bagfuls of rubbish, removing glass bottles from grassy verges to ensure that children don't trip and hurt themselves. And he starts theorizing, well, maybe I can do this all over Bothelford. Maybe I can make it beautiful again. Maybe I can do something small that transforms the town and makes it less intolerable, even if I can't get justice for the victims of this gang. And he picks up bags full of rubbish. He doesn't have anywhere to put it, so he just puts it by his own home, hoping it will be collected eventually. He piles the bags in a line, going from smallest to largest, and within only half an hour managed to decimate the obnoxious trail of the spermatozoid that had so offended and confused him when he first saw it. He finished at around 5 o'clock, without having eaten for the whole day. The days were starting to shorten and the sun was lower than usual, and so he finished as the day did. Jack looked over the street, what he had accomplished in the evening sun. His mother was out until 7 to see a friend of hers. His father was God knows where. What was the right word for what he had done to the street? He had restored it. He had restored, with only his own efforts, however unskillfully, his home to how it used to look in his childhood on many an unimportant, boring night. And for almost a minute, he wasn't trying to distract himself from all the horrible things that happened to Agatha. He knew what had happened, but he was tending to the land, his land, and this was now ever so slightly less of a place where either of those sorts of things could happen. Ridiculous as it might have been to think, he sincerely believed that he had reduced the amount of evil in the area and weakened the influence of those who occupied his home. He felt that he had made it just a little bit less like hell, and that he had brought a sliver of Bothelford back. His back was sore, his arms ached with the effort of his work, and he remembered the motto above the two brewers, by the sweat of thy brow shalt thou earn thy bread. He asked himself before the headlamps of a passing car, what if I did this every 3 weeks? Or no, what if I did this, and then later this week I decided to plant flowers? What would really prevent me from going out and buying some poppy seeds, some lilies, and planting them on the grass verges and in the alleys? Maybe I would need planning permission. There's a guy currently in Britain being threatened with arrest for cleaning up rivers, by the way. But there's a chance I could do it without anyone noticing. Then it would rain, and they would grow, And what if I worked with my parents? What if I wanted to clean the road itself with a specialised hose and built a birdhouse and left seeds there daily and I befriended the birds? What if, after everyone forgets about my damaged reputation and moves on to the next ridiculous person, I get a job as a plumber or a bin man? Aren't they supposed to make a lot of money doing the work no one else has bothered to do? Why not? And if I can't, well, why can't I keep going to the pub, join a sports team, get a hobby, meet some local lads? Whoever cares about university grades is going to want to get rid of me anyway, so why, if I worked with my parents and then I made some friends who were interested, couldn't I set up a service across town? What if we cleaned it all up together, regularly, out of love for the place? Wouldn't that make everyone happier? What if we were paid to do the cleaning and then we set up some art classes with the extra cash? Or what if, after everything we would have already done, we got some of our friends in the police or on the local council? Wouldn't that change everything? As the car passed, a big 4x4, Jack noticed what looked like Fatima, his Muslim neighbour, in the back passenger seat among her numberless children. He turned and let his gaze follow it, as 6 crushed Diet Coke cans fell out onto the street from the left window on its side. And this is very common. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, when she was working as a Somali interpreter in the Netherlands, described how frequently Muslim mothers would allow their children to be delinquents in the middle of the street, throw litter on the ground, and say, God wills it. Because of the fatalism in Islam that says, well, you don't know what's going to happen from this day or the next, and actually because the Quran was written on stone tablets in heaven, everything that will happen has already happened, and it's all predestined. So you don't need to take any personal responsibility so long as you just follow the strict tenets of the Quran and the Hadith. And also there's this sort of short-term thinking that comes with clan morality, cousin marriage, diminished IQs, a lack of long-term planning in these cultures that doesn't translate to the extended time preference of Northwest Europeans who had to deal with harsh winters. But what Ed is pointing out here is, for all your love of beauty, for all your coveting of those small corners of the English countryside, the rare bits of nature that still grow through the cracks in the concrete, for all your desire to see living things that aren't just the list of animals that are buried beneath the tarmac in Bothelford earlier on, for all your intentions to beautify the place and cleanse it of the evil that has been brought into our midst, all your efforts can't counteract the entropy enacted on us by, yes, the hostile tribes that have been brought into our country, but also by the people that brought them here. The people that continue to insist in the media that nothing has been better than right now. That continue to rewrite our history so that you have no point of reference for how things in the past used to be more peaceful, more beautiful, more homogeneous. They insist that there has only ever been the one long eternal present, and despite its horrors, you must love it. And that you can't do anything to improve it, because then your little act of charity, of love, would show people they don't need to live like this. And the political order can't stand people thinking things like that now, can they? There's something almost Thomas Hardy-esque about this novel as well, because Jack and Agatha are a little bit like Tess and Tess of the D'Urbervilles, undergo this horrific violation of their innocence, of what is meant to be normal, wholesome English family life, and then when they try to retreat into nature, when Tess goes to work on the dairy farm, stares up at the night sky, feels her sense of self falling away as she realizes the enormity of the universe, the sublime qualities of the stars. And here, as Jack tries to extrapolate out from the principle of loving birds and plants and nature, and his role as one man taking responsibility, as Jordan Peterson probably would have told him in a YouTube video he would have seen on his phone, going around cleaning up his bedroom and his area to properly ordering and beautifying the universe. How for all of those intentions, the injustice of society and the worst elements within it that are encouraged to commit heinous violent crimes because they face no consequences will rob them of that beautiful dream. And so there are some real parallels in this with 19th century works that actually lamented the plight of working class girls like Agatha, whose ruin, and Bothelford's, has been caused by the welfare state, mass migration, drugs, drink, pornography, the easy availability of social media, the digital distractions on smartphones and the television. All of these factors conspire to immiserate this town and its children. Meanwhile, the children are being outnumbered by their peers from different countries and continents, who will mean that as Bothelford is undergoing its death throes, as its children are suffering these atrocities, this is only a temporary period of suffering until the town itself becomes just another unrecognizable slum in Kabul, Lahore, or Uttar Pradesh. And the reason this resonates with me is because I do something similar to what Jack does here, as does the author Ed. I go to a little walled rose garden nearby. I occasionally started volunteering there because we took our wedding photos there, and it's a beautiful little place tended to by a group of pensioners. I'm the youngest man there, and I think that's because our generation is shrinking, both in size and in time that they can spend volunteering on these beautiful little places. But if you do have the opportunity, go do it. And as well as sort of cutting the edges of the flower beds and helping weed and having a chat with people that tend to it, I do go around collecting litter now and again, because there's a very diverse school up the road, and they have decided to use this beautiful walled garden as a place to discard their food cartons and takeaway bags during school lunch hours, film TikToks, climb trees, have performative fights with one another. And around there, I had someone wave a machete out of a car window passing by me. So even in the beautiful little corners of England that you've grown up in and you think are relatively safe, all of these various forces that have turned Bothelford into a kind of living hell, they're coming for us eventually. And even as the protagonists try to retreat to a corner of England where such evils aren't present, it is implied those evils will follow them. And they'll follow all of us if we don't do something about it. Now, that isn't to discourage you from trying to make little areas of your life beautiful, from having a family, from trying to keep them safe. But we do have to do all of it knowing it's going to be very difficult. But we do have to do all of it knowing that we live in the constant danger of failing them. Sorry, this one's actually a bit difficult to record. I've done so many retakes on this one just because the implications of this book, they resonate with a very real fear I think all of us have and don't want to admit. And that is that despite all our best intentions, we could at any day, for any reason, have our town or our own lives befall the same fate as Jack in the book. And so it is well worth read. I will leave a link down in the description to get a copy, and I believe I'm going to be doing a discussion about the book with author Ed and my friend Harrison Pitt very soon, so keep your eyes out for that. But one final comment, if I may. I think it's in the furnace of these intolerable cultural conditions that some bold creatives might start to come forward. And it's very telling that Ed is also a young Zoomer Englishman. Same demographic as Jack, grew up in the same circumstances as I did, we're about the same age. And things have gotten so awful that the real-life versions of Jack will just push through the horrors imposed upon them and those they love to just tell the truth. And they're determined to fix it. And there is only so long that the state can act as a kind of catacomb, holding back the forces of retribution for these young Englishmen, for what has just been done to them, to their lives, to their loved ones, to their country. And the uncertain trade-off all of us must be honest about facing is whether or not we will get to the point where we can ascend to positions of influence and do something about it, or whether the people that are determined to turn our country into South Africa or Lebanon will succeed. I'm going to do my best to make damn sure they don't. And despite it all, so should you.